After being pregnant for 11 months, Tommy finally gave birth to a beautiful baby girl. The nurses quickly took the baby for observation when suddenly something strange began to happen. Huge flies began to surround the baby, and as much as the nurses tried to pass it off as normal, the sight became more terrifying as the seconds went by. The entire baby's body was now covered in flies that buzzed loudly, terrifying the nurses who abandoned the baby and watched from a distance. Tommy, the baby's mother, could sense that something was off with how the nurses stood in the corner and stared at her baby. She sat up weakly, her heart pounding, as she noticed the nurses' fearful whispers and their refusal to approach her child. Her husband Femi had gone to pick up some essentials for the baby. What's going on? Tommy asked the nurses, who informed her that something was wrong with her baby. We've never seen anything like this before, they said to Tommy, who forced herself up to go check on her child, her eyes wide in shock to see her newborn baby covered in strange flies. Tommy immediately grabbed her baby and began to kill off the flies. It took a few minutes and the flies all went away, leaving Tommy alone to cater for her newborn child. All the nurses were too terrified to approach, so they kept their distance, whispering amongst themselves and exchanging fearful glances at Tommy, who was now holding her child close, her hands trembling as she rocked her baby to sleep. Not long afterwards, the baby stopped crying, and Tommy held her close to her chest, whispering prayers over her. Tommy knew deep down that something was off about her baby, but she was unwilling to subject her baby to the cold stares and judgment of the nurses or anyone else for that matter. This was her first child, her miracle after a long and challenging pregnancy, and Tommy made up her mind to protect her at all costs. Moments later, her husband Femi returned, his arms full of supplies and a cheerful expression on his face. How's my little princess doing? He asked, stepping into the room to catch a glimpse of their baby. The joy on his face in that moment made it difficult for Tommy to tell him about the flies. She pretended as if all was well and watched him carry the baby in his arms, her heart racing as she wondered if the flies would return or if Femi would notice the strange unease that had gripped the nurses around. But nothing happened. The baby slept peacefully in Femi's arms, her tiny fingers curling around his as he rocked her to sleep. Tommy watched silently, her mind a whirlwind of questions and fear. Was it possible that what she had seen was just a fleeting anomaly, or was it something far darker, something beyond her understanding? She decided to stay quiet, at least for now, not wanting to dampen Femi's happiness or fuel the nurse's already palpable fear. Days passed and nothing unusual happened. The hospital discharged Tommy, who took her baby home, swaddled in her plush blanket. They arrived home, and Tommy was welcomed by her husband's mother, who had come to care for the baby. Tommy could not hide her displeasure. They had agreed that her own mother would come care for the baby, so, seeing her husband's mother standing at the door with a smile on her face, sent a wave of frustration through Tommy, who forced a smile as she watched her approach. Mama Femi stepped forward, her arms open as she welcomed her grandchild home. She barely gave Tommy a chance to speak before taking the baby from her arms. Oh, look at her, so beautiful just like her father, she said as she showered the baby with praises and blessings. Tommy could not understand why she would insist on coming, knowing that the wife's mother ought to come in cases like this. She had already been to all her daughters' homes to care for their babies in the past and was still insisting on coming to care for her son's baby, knowing that it was a role reserved for the wife's mother. Tommy forced herself to stay calm as her mother-in-law rocked the baby to sleep. My granddaughter is truly special, she said, her eyes fixated on the baby. Tommy stared at her in anger, her unease growing as each minute passed. She tried to mask her displeasure, but her heart was too heavy to hold it in. Mama, my mother had already planned to come care for the baby. This is her first grandchild, and although I'm happy you are here, I would have also been happier if my mother came, Tommy said to Mama Femi, who accused her of being so disrespectful and rude. You think you know it all, Tommy, she said sharply, her tone laced with anger. I'm not just here as a grandmother. I'm here to make sure that my grandchild is well raised because I can see that your mother did a bad job raising you, she said as she walked out on Tommy, who stood there shocked and unable to speak. Night came, and Tommy lay in bed with her baby by her side. Her mother-in-law, Mama Femi, had retired to her room after their heated argument, and Femi, unaware of the tension between his mother and his wife, fell asleep on the couch downstairs. Tommy drifted into a very deep sleep and was awoken some hours later by a weird sound. Her eyes opened wide in shock to see her baby floating in the air with flies surrounding her tiny body once again. The buzzing sound of the flies were deafening, and the sight was so horrifying. Tommy screamed in terror, her voice echoing through the house as she trembled in fear. Her husband Femi rushed into the room to know why she was screaming and was confronted by the terrifying sight. His eyes opened in terror as he clutched his chest, unable to breathe. His mother, on hearing the commotion, rushed to check up on them when she caught sight of the baby suspended in the air with flies buzzing around her. No one knew why this was happening, but what was sure was the fact that this was not normal. The whole room erupted in panic as everyone began to think of what to do, when suddenly the flies disappeared and the baby floated back into the bed. The whole room remained silent as everyone watched the baby from a distance, unsure of what had just happened. Mama Kemi, without mincing words, revealed that something serious was wrong with the child. I'm sure you are behind all this, she said to Tommy, who she accused of being a witch. Femi, I warned you that this girl that you decided to marry was a witch, but you decided not to listen. Now, see what she has done to your child, Mama Femi said to Femi, who stared at his wife in disbelief. Tommy stood there frozen as tears poured down her eyes. She stared at her husband Femi, hoping that he would defend her in front of his mother, but Femi said nothing, his silence cutting her deeper than words ever could. Mama Femi continued her rant, her voice filled with venom as she spoke. Only God knows what you have done to my grandchild, she said to Tommy, who could not bear being accused of being a witch. She watched as her mother-in-law carried the baby away from her, warning her never to lay her hands on the baby again. From now on, you will not touch this baby without my permission, she said to Tommy as she took the baby away from her, not caring how Tommy felt by her words. Tommy stood there shocked, her heart shattered, as Mama Femi disappeared into her room with the baby. Her husband Femi avoided her gaze, mumbling something underneath his breath about needing time to think. Tommy could not believe what was happening. She was now being treated as an outcast in her own home, stripped of her rights as a mother, and warned never to go close to her daughter. Tommy spent the whole night crying. She remembered how she struggled with her pregnancy for 11 months and the pain she had to go through to birth her child. She knew how much she loved her daughter and could not believe that her mother-in-law would look her in the eyes and accuse her of being possessed. Tommy sat there broken as her daughter's cries traveled down the hall to her ears. Her heart raced as she wondered if the baby was fine. She stood up and walked towards the sound of the cry and arrived her mother-in-law's room, which was locked. Tommy knocked for hours, pleading to see her baby, but her mother-in-law warned her to keep her evil hands away from her grandchild. Tommy's world spiraled out of control as she stood outside the locked door, pleading with Mama Femi to let her see her baby. Her voice cracked from desperation, but all she received was silence on the other side of the door. Defeated, she slumped against the door, her tears soaking into her nightgown. The night stretched endlessly, and Femi remained absent, retreating to his office downstairs. Tommy felt utterly alone. Her thoughts raced with fear and confusion as she wondered why this was happening and what exactly was wrong with her baby. Her husband's silence at a time like this also made things worse as Tommy could not comprehend why her life had suddenly taken a very dark turn. When morning came, Tommy was awoken by the cry of her baby. She rushed towards the sound of the cry and met a strange looking man holding her baby and doing some enchantment. Her mother-in-law had invited a native doctor to their home to perform a ritual over the baby. Tommy froze in the doorway, her heart racing as she saw the man dressed in tattered robes, adorned with cowries and feathers, chanting in a language she could not understand. Her baby lay on a straw mat, surrounded by strange items, candles, chalk markings, and bowls of unidentified substances. Mama Femi stood in a corner with her son, her arms crossed, as she watched the man perform the ritual. Tommy could not believe her eyes. She yelled out in frustration, asking what a native doctor was doing in their home, and her mother-in-law looked at her and said that since she refused to confess, she had invited someone who can deal with the evil that Tommy had brought into their family. Tommy was so full of rage at this point. She charged towards the native doctor and grabbed her baby, yelling for him to leave her house. Tommy scattered all the items he placed around the baby, screaming and yelling for him to leave, and the native doctor, full of rage, lifted up his hand to strike her with madness, for his evil plan backfired to him, and the man ran mad in their presence. Everyone opened their eyes and mouths in shock as they watched Tommy carry her child and walk into her room. Mama Femi was too terrified to stop her, as she wondered what kind of power Tommy had to make a native doctor run mad. Even her husband was now terrified of her. He stood there frozen, staring at the chaos that had now unfolded. His mother, Mama Femi, clutched her chest in disbelief, her lips trembling as she tried to comprehend what had just happened. Tommy, however, did not stop to explain or argue. She carried her baby into her room and locked the door behind her. She sat on her bed, her arms trembling as she held her daughter close, promising that she would never let anyone harm her for as long as she lives. Tommy picked up her phone and called her mother, explaining all that had happened, and her mother, without wasting any time, rushed to her house to help her. Tommy was her only daughter, and she couldn't sit back and watch such injustice come upon her daughter without saying a word. She arrived at the house and met Mama Femi, who was sitting in the living room, her face etched with fear and worry. Femi was pacing back and forth, lost in his own thoughts that he didn't even notice when she walked into the house. The entire atmosphere was filled with tension as Tommy's mother decided to break the silence. "What is going on here?" she demanded, her voice firm and filled with authority. "What has my daughter done to deserve this kind of treatment from you two?" she asked Femi and his mother, who were startled to see her there. Mama Femi, without mincing any words, told her to ask her witch of a daughter what she had done to her grandchild. "Your evil daughter just made a native doctor run mad, and you are here confronting us as though we are the problem," she said to Tommy's mother, who rebuked her for calling her daughter evil. "You are the evil one for inviting a native doctor into my daughter's home. If you say a native doctor ran mad in my daughter's presence, then perhaps you should ask yourself why, because last I checked, evil can never triumph over good," Tommy's mother said as she walked out on them to go find her daughter. She arrived at Tommy's room and met some flies hovering over her grandchild. "This is definitely not normal," she said to Tommy, who she advised to go get dressed as they were both taking the baby to the church. Tommy nodded without hesitation. She dressed up quickly and swaddled her baby in her arms, leaving the room with her mother by her side. As they passed through the living room, Mama Femi stood up abruptly. "Where do you think you're going with my grandchild?" she demanded, as Tommy's mother informed her that they were heading to the church. Her voice carried an authority that left no room for argument. "Enough of this madness. It's time to seek God's intervention in the life of this child," she said as she grabbed her daughter and walked out of the house. Femi tried to speak to his wife in that moment, but Tommy cut him off, her voice shaking with emotion. "You've done nothing to defend me or our baby, Femi. I'm not staying here. for more accusations and rituals. If you want to help us, come to the church. Otherwise, stay out of my way, she said angrily as Femi glanced at his mother, who looked visibly offended. Femi knew that he had really messed up, and for the first time, he saw the pain in his wife's eyes. I'll come with you, he said, as he grabbed his car keys, ready to follow them to church. Mama Femi could not believe her eyes. Who told you fools that church is the answer? She said, as she folded her arms in anger, saying that what the child needs is deliverance and not empty prayers. Tommy's mother turned sharply to respond to her, asking if she thinks that inviting a native doctor to their home was the solution. You have already endangered this child with your reckless actions. If you truly care about your grandchild, you'll come with us to the church and pray. Otherwise, step aside and let those who care do what's right, she said as Mama Femi grudgingly followed them to the church. They arrived in the massive church building and was directed to the pastor of the big church. The pastor, a calm and gentle man with a commanding presence, listened intently as Tommy and her mother explained everything to him. The flies, the floating baby, the accusation, and even the native doctor that ran mad. The pastor nodded on hearing the entire story. He commanded them to place the baby on the altar, and Tommy gently laid her daughter on a soft cloth on the altar and stepped backwards. The pastor began to pray fervently, his voice filled with authority as the prayers grew louder and more intense. Just as he prayed, a low humming sound began to fill the air, and the strange flies reappeared, their buzzing growing louder and louder as they swarmed above the baby. Everyone was now filled with terror as Mama Femi stepped back, clutching her chest in fear. I told you this child is cursed, she whispered as she watched the pastor command the flies to leave. However, the buzzing continued even louder as the pastor intensified his prayers. Every evil plan, every curse, every attack on this child must be broken in the name of Jesus, he said, declaring that the child belonged to God. His prayers intensified, echoing through the church as the flies began to swell violently above the baby, forming a dark shifting cloud above her. The congregation, now gathered out of curiosity, watched in horror as the cloud of flies seemed to resist the prayers. Who gave you the blankets that this child is swaddled in? The pastor asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the noise. Tommy turned to Femi, confusion written all over her face. You said you bought it, didn't you? Femi's face drained of color as he stammered, revealing to her that it was a gift. Tommy's voice rose, sharp with panic. A gift? From who, Femi? There was a long pause, and Femi looked down at his feet. From Folu, my ex. The buzzing of the flies grew deafening, as though reacting to the revelation. Everyone in the congregation gasped, and Mama Femi's face turned pale. She whispered in shock, Folu? The pastor raised his hand. This is it. The blanket is the source of the attack. Tommy's fury flared as she asked Femi how he could bring something from his ex into their child's life without telling her. You knew the history we had, the pain she caused, and yet you trusted her? Tommy asked Femi, who stuttered and revealed that he didn't think much of it. She insisted that it was just a gift and I didn't want to be rude, so I accepted it. Tommy's face twisted in disbelief as she responded in anger. No, you didn't think, Femi, she snapped, her voice breaking in anger. Her anger wasn't just for the betrayal, but for the danger Femi's decision had brought upon their child. You let your ex-girlfriend give our baby a gift, knowing our history and the tension it could cause, and you never thought it wise to tell me? She asked her husband, who pleaded for her forgiveness. The pastor interjected, his voice calm but commanding. This is not the time for blame. Bring me the blanket, he said as Tommy unwrapped her baby and handed the blanket over to the pastor. The buzzing flies seemed to follow the blanket as the pastor laid it on the altar and began to pray. Immediately, the atmosphere in the church grew darker and the tension grew thick enough to cut with a knife. The pastor began to pray fervently, his voice filled with authority. Every weapon formed against this child, every evil attached to this object, be destroyed in the name of Jesus, he said as he poured anointing oil over the blanket and watched as the buzzing sound grew louder, as if the flies were fighting back. The blanket suddenly burst into flames, burning with a bright intensity that left no trace of ash. All the flies vanished, their buzzing sound replaced by a deafening silence. The baby let out a loud, healthy cry, a sound that was so full of life and victory. The pastor turned to the family and revealed that the evil had been broken. Your child is now free, but take heed, as this attack was not just random, it was born out of jealousy and vengeance. Stay vigilant in prayers always and protect your home from all evil, he said to Tommy and her husband Femi, who thanked him for saving their daughter. Mama Femi stepped forward, her expression one of deep regret. Her voice cracked as she spoke. Tommy, I owe you an apology. I was wrong. I let my bias blind me and I accused you unfairly. I feel so ashamed knowing that the same woman that I wanted my son to marry Folu was the one behind all this evil. Please forgive me. Tommy looked at her mother-in-law, her heart still heavy with the hurt of the past weeks, but seeing the genuine remorse in Mama Femi's eyes, she forgave her as Mama Femi promised to return home and allow Tommy's mother to look after the child instead. I've caused more harm than good, she said, as she apologized not only to Tommy, but to her son Femi. Femi also stepped forward to apologize to his wife Tommy, guilt written all over his face. Tommy, I am so sorry. I didn't defend you when I should have. Please forgive me, he said, promising to do better. And Tommy, though still hurt, forgave him for all that he did. That was how their family found healing and unity after the terrifying ordeal. Mama Femi returned to her home as promised, stepping aside to allow Tommy's mother to care for the baby. She vowed to mend her relationship with Tommy, now treating her with respect and kindness. Tommy and Femi worked on rebuilding their trust, and Femi ensured that Tommy felt loved and valued. He also cut all ties from Fulu, blocking her from ever contacting their family again. The baby, now free from the evil flies, thrived under the loving care of her parents and grandmother. The pastor continued to check on the family, reminding them to remain prayerful and vigilant. Tommy made it a point to pray over her child every day, ensuring that nothing like this would ever happen again. The lesson to be learned from this story is that we should be careful of the gifts we accept from others. Never underestimate the intentions behind seemingly harmless gestures, especially from individuals with unresolved connections to the past. The ordeal also highlighted the importance of standing firm in faith, prayer, and unity as a family when faced with challenges. Femi learned that his silence and failure to defend his wife caused unnecessary pain and that trust and communication are the bedrock of any marriage. He understood the need to prioritize his wife and family over external influences. Mama Femi realized that her bias and interference had not only hurt Tommy, but also jeopardized her granddaughter's well-being. She learned the value of humility and the importance of seeking truth before passing judgment. Her sincere apology and willingness to change mended the strained relationship with Tommy, setting a foundation for mutual respect. Tommy, despite being unjustly accused, demonstrated resilience and love, showing the strength of a mother determined to protect her child. She also learned the importance of speaking up for herself and trusting her instincts when something feels off. In the end, the family was reminded of the power of forgiveness and how it can pave the way for healing and restoration. The evil may have tested their unity, but through faith, honesty, and love, they emerged stronger and wiser. I hope you enjoyed the story.